Have you ever watched someone pack their emotional bags before the relationship even showed signs of trouble? The psychology of why avoidants always leave first reveals one of the most fascinating yet heartbreaking patterns in human connection. Like a master chess player thinking 5 moves ahead, avoidant individuals orchestrate their exit strategy long before their partner realizes the game has begun. This isn't cruelty or calculated manipulation, but rather a deeply ingrained survival mechanism that stems from early childhood experiences and shapes every romantic encounter thereafter. The human mind possesses an extraordinary ability to protect itself from perceived threats, even when those threats exist only in the realm of possibility. When someone with avoidant attachment feels the first stirrings of genuine intimacy, their psychological alarm system activates with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. They begin to notice flaws in their partner that weren't there before, create distance through work or hobbies, and slowly withdraw the emotional investment they once freely offered. This process happens so gradually that their partner often mistakes it for a temporary rough patch rather than the beginning of the end. Understanding this pattern requires examining the cognitive biases that fuel avoidant behavior, particularly the negativity bias and confirmation bias working in tandem. The avoidant mind becomes hypervigilant for signs of disappointment, rejection, or engulfment, filtering every interaction through a lens of potential threat. A delayed text response becomes evidence of waning interest. A request for more quality time transforms into suffocating neediness. An expression of love triggers fears of losing independence rather than feelings of joy and connection. But here lies the tragic irony of avoidant attachment. The very behaviors designed to protect against abandonment create the exact outcome they fear most. By leaving first, avoidants maintain the illusion of control while simultaneously proving to themselves that relationships are temporary and people always leave. This self-fulfilling prophecy becomes their truth, reinforced with each relationship that ends according to their unconscious script. The stories you'll hear today illustrate how this pattern plays out in real relationships, affecting not just the avoidant individual, but their partners who are left confused, hurt, and questioning their own worth. More importantly, you'll discover practical strategies for recognizing these patterns, whether in yourself or someone you love, and learn how awareness can begin to break cycles that have persisted for years or even decades. If you want to better understand someone's attachment style, see the link in the description to one of the most popular books on attachment theory. Consider the tale of Marcus, a successful architect who possessed the remarkable ability to design beautiful spaces for others while remaining unable to create emotional space for intimacy in his own life. At 32, Marcus had perfected the art of the 18-month relationship. This wasn't intentional planning, mind you, but rather an unconscious timeline that played out with startling consistency. Each relationship followed the same trajectory: passionate beginning, comfortable middle, and an exit strategy that materialized just as his partner began discussing future plans or deeper commitment. Marcus met Sarah at a gallery opening, drawn to her infectious laugh and the way she spoke passionately about the art pieces surrounding them. Their early months together felt intoxicating. Marcus found himself looking forward to her texts, planning creative dates, and even introducing her to his close friends. Sarah, a warm and secure woman, reciprocated his enthusiasm while maintaining her own independence and interests. Everything seemed perfectly aligned for a healthy, lasting relationship. But something shifted around month 15, subtle as morning fog creeping across a harbor. Marcus began noticing things about Sarah that hadn't bothered him before. Her habit of humming while cooking, once endearing, now felt intrusive. Her desire to plan weekend getaways started feeling like pressure. When she casually mentioned wanting to meet his parents during the holidays, Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest that he couldn't quite name. The confirmation bias began its insidious work, causing Marcus to interpret Sarah's loving gestures through a lens of suspicion. Her surprise visit to his office became evidence of clinginess rather than affection. Her excitement about a mutual friend's engagement transformed into pressure for their own relationship to progress. Marcus started working later hours, claiming project deadlines that were more fabricated than real. He began responding to her texts with shorter messages, creating emotional distance under the guise of being busy. Sarah noticed the shift, but attributed it to work stress, much like Serena van der Woodsen from Gossip Girl might rationalize away Dan Humphrey's moody behavior as artistic temperament rather than emotional withdrawal. She increased her efforts to connect, planning his favorite meals and suggesting relaxing activities together. Her increased attention only intensified Marcus's unconscious fear of engulfment, triggering what psychologists call the deactivating strategies common in avoidant attachment. The negativity bias amplified every minor conflict or difference between them. A disagreement about which restaurant to visit became evidence of fundamental incompatibility. Sarah's disappointment when he cancelled plans last minute proved to Marcus that she was too demanding. His mind began constructing a narrative that justified his growing emotional distance, collecting evidence that the relationship was doomed while ignoring the overwhelming proof of their compatibility and Sarah's genuine care for him. By month 17, Marcus had mentally checked out of the relationship while maintaining the appearance of participation. He went through the motions of partnership while his heart built walls that Sarah couldn't see but somehow sensed. She found herself walking on eggshells, trying to recapture the connection they once shared, unknowingly playing into the very dynamic that Marcus's unconscious mind expected from relationships. The end came swiftly and seemingly out of nowhere, at least from Sarah's perspective. Marcus announced that he needed space to focus on his career and wasn't ready for the level of commitment their relationship seemed to be heading toward. Sarah was devastated, blindsided by what felt like a sudden change of heart. She replayed their relationship, searching for signs she had missed, blaming herself for being too needy or not understanding enough. What Sarah couldn't see was that Marcus had been planning this exit for months, not consciously, but through the gradual emotional withdrawal that protected him from experiencing the vulnerability of being left first. Like Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You, though thankfully without the sinister intentions, Marcus had created an entire narrative about their relationship that justified his departure while preserving his sense of control and emotional safety. The most heartbreaking aspect of Marcus's story isn't the end of one relationship, but the pattern that would repeat itself again and again until he developed the awareness to recognize his unconscious programming. His next relationship would follow the same timeline, with the same emotional withdrawal, creating the same outcome while reinforcing his belief that lasting love was impossible. This story illustrates how avoidant attachment doesn't just affect one relationship, but becomes a template that shapes every romantic encounter. The avoidant individual isn't intentionally cruel or manipulative. They're operating from a place of deep-seated fear, using strategies that once protected them, but now sabotage their chances of experiencing the very connection their hearts secretly long for. Now that you understand the psychological mechanisms behind avoidant behavior, let's explore practical strategies for breaking these patterns, whether you recognize them in yourself or someone you care about. The journey begins with awareness, but awareness alone isn't enough. Change requires consistent action and a willingness to sit with discomfort rather than running from it. The first step involves recognizing the physical sensations that accompany emotional activation. When intimacy increases or commitment conversations arise, avoidant individuals typically experience specific bodily responses: tightness in the chest, shallow breathing, restlessness, or a sudden urge to create distance. Learning to identify these signals as they occur, rather than after the damage is done, creates the possibility for different choices. Think of it as developing an early warning system for your own emotional responses. Practice sitting with these uncomfortable sensations rather than immediately acting on them. When the urge to withdraw strikes, instead of creating distance, try communicating what you're experiencing to your partner. This might sound like sharing that commitment conversations feel scary rather than disappearing for 3 days. The goal isn't to eliminate the fear, but to develop new responses to it. Remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in the presence of fear. The second strategy involves challenging the cognitive biases that fuel avoidant behavior. When you notice yourself focusing on your partner's flaws or feeling suffocated by their affection, pause and ask yourself specific questions. Are you seeing the complete picture, or only the parts that confirm your fears? Would a neutral observer interpret your partner's behavior the same way? What evidence contradicts the story your mind is creating about this relationship? Create a daily practice of identifying 3 things you appreciate about your partner, particularly during times when criticism feels easier than gratitude. This isn't about fake positivity, but about training your brain to notice the full spectrum of your relationship, rather than just the parts that trigger your fear response. Like Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris, learning to see beyond her initial judgments about French culture, you can learn to see beyond your initial fear-based reactions to intimacy. The third approach focuses on communication patterns that build connection rather than create distance. Instead of withdrawing when you feel overwhelmed, practice expressing your needs clearly and directly. This might mean asking for a few hours alone to process emotions rather than becoming cold and distant for days. It could involve sharing your fears about losing independence while also acknowledging your desire for connection. Develop the habit of repair after difficult conversations or moments of withdrawal. Avoidant individuals often assume that conflict or disconnection means the relationship is over, but healthy relationships are built on the ability to reconnect after ruptures. Practice reaching out first after arguments, acknowledging when your fear has caused you to create distance, and expressing your commitment to working through difficulties together rather than running from them. The fourth strategy involves building tolerance for your partner's emotions and needs. Avoidant attachment often stems from childhood environments where emotions were seen as burdens or threats. As an adult, your partner's sadness, anger, or need for comfort might trigger the same defensive responses you developed as a child. Practice viewing your partner's emotions as information rather than threats to your safety or freedom. When your partner expresses needs or desires for more connection, resist the urge to interpret this as criticism or demands. Instead, try to hear the love and desire for closeness beneath their words. Someone asking to spend more time together isn't trying to control you, but rather expressing that your presence brings them joy. This reframe can transform triggering conversations into opportunities for deeper connection. The fifth technique involves creating security through consistent small actions rather than grand gestures. Avoidant individuals often struggle with the daily maintenance of emotional intimacy, preferring dramatic expressions of love followed by periods of distance. Instead, focus on showing up reliably in small ways, responding to texts promptly, following through on plans, and maintaining emotional availability even when you feel like withdrawing. Build rituals of connection that happen regardless of your emotional state. This might be a morning coffee together, evening walks, or simply 5 minutes of undivided attention when you both get home from work. These consistent touch points create security for both you and your partner, while proving to your nervous system that intimacy and independence can coexist. Understanding that change is a gradual process that involves setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure will help maintain your motivation when progress feels slow. You might successfully stay present during one difficult conversation only to withdraw completely during the next. This isn't failure, but part of the learning process. Each time you choose connection over withdrawal, you're creating new neural pathways that make future connection easier. The psychology of why avoidants always leave first reveals a profound truth about human nature. We often recreate the very experiences we fear most in an attempt to maintain some sense of control over them. The avoidant individual who leaves first believes they're protecting themselves from abandonment, but they're actually guaranteeing the very outcome they're trying to avoid. This self-fulfilling prophecy becomes a prison of their own making, one that keeps them safe but ultimately alone. Breaking free from this pattern requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands a willingness to feel vulnerable, to sit with uncertainty, and to choose trust even when every instinct screams for self-protection. The process isn't comfortable, but neither is a lifetime of relationships that end just as they begin to deepen into something meaningful and lasting. Think of Marcus from our earlier story, still cycling through 18-month relationships at 45, wondering why love always feels temporary. Or consider the alternative. Marcus at 45 in a relationship that has weathered storms and grown stronger, having learned that true security comes not from leaving first, but from choosing to stay and work through difficulties together. The difference between these two futures lies entirely in the choices made today. For those who love someone with avoidant attachment, remember that their withdrawal isn't a reflection of your worth or the strength of their feelings for you. Their leaving first is a desperate attempt to outrun their own fears, not an indication that the relationship lacks value. Understanding this doesn't mean accepting hurtful behavior, but it can provide context that makes their actions less personal and more comprehensible. The invitation here extends beyond romantic relationships into every area of life where fear of abandonment creates preemptive abandonment. Friendships, family relationships, career opportunities, and personal dreams all suffer when the pattern of leaving first becomes the default response to vulnerability. Breaking this cycle creates ripple effects that touch every aspect of life. Change begins with the radical act of staying present when everything in you wants to run. It continues with the daily choice to interpret love as love rather than threat, to see your partner's needs as opportunities for connection rather than evidence of incompatibility. Most importantly, it requires treating yourself with the same compassion you would offer a dear friend struggling with the same fears. The path forward isn't about becoming someone different, but about becoming more fully yourself, including the parts that long for connection alongside the parts that fear it. Both aspects of your nature deserve acknowledgement and care. The goal isn't to eliminate your need for independence, but to discover that true independence includes the freedom to choose interdependence when it serves your highest good. Your attachment style developed as a brilliant adaptation to your early environment, protecting you when protection was needed most. Now, as an adult with choices and agency, you can honor that adaptation while also recognizing when it no longer serves you. The same intelligence that created these protective strategies can create new ones based on love rather than fear, connection rather than isolation. Start today. Start with awareness. Start with one conversation where you stay present instead of withdrawing. Start with one moment of choosing trust over suspicion. The future you want exists on the other side of the fears you've been running from, and the only way through is to stop leaving first and start staying put.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel, because you deserve beautiful relationships.